For the previous academic year, from 2013 to 14, I was lucky enough to be one of 2 Texas Tribune fellows and spend a year in Austin, embedded at the Texas Tribune, studying best practices in the business of digital news. My fellow Tribune fellow was Tim Griggs, who was actually promoted to publisher and chief operating officer within about 6 months of arriving there. And it was generously funded by the Knight Foundation. And what I just wanted to explain is that was actually a separate project from the book, although very related to the book. I had more or less finished writing the manuscript when I began the fellowship at the Texas Tribune in August of 2014. But I did wrap it up in the early part of the fellowship, and they're very separate but related projects. And so the reason I mention this is because I wrote a summary report, white paper, of my experience as a Texas Tribune Fellow that is supposed to be distributed very soon by the Knight Foundation in conjunction with an overall report on the state of nonprofit news. And I hear that both of those reports could be released next week, as early as next week, in conjunction with each other. So eager to talk more about that if you really want to drill down on the money side, especially on best practices of the business of digital news in the nonprofit sector. But what I'm talking about today is the book project. So this is the book Engaged Journalism, Connecting with Digitally Empowered News Audiences. It's published by Columbia University Press. It's part of the CJR book series. And it's based on about over 100 interviews that I did traveling to newsrooms. The Meadow School of the Arts at SMU was very generous in granting me some time off and some travel grants to be able to visit newsrooms all over the country. And so what the product of it is this book, which just came out last month. And it's really kind of a hybrid book in terms of the being aimed at professionals, academics, and students. It's not a pointy-headed academic book with a bunch of theories, but it's also not a textbook with exercises. It's really just meant to appeal to anyone who's interested in the future of news. I'm assigning it in my classes, surprise, surprise, surprise. But the way I've been using it is as a supplementary read to kind of hammer home some of the themes that I'll go over here. But I think it could be useful in the classroom for especially entrepreneurship and social media and audience engagement classes, but also hopefully in newsrooms as well. And there's a lot more details available via this short link. But here we're talking about definitions today, right? I'll just right off the bat explain what I define engaged journalism as in the book. There are so many definitions of the term engagement, both within and outside the world of journalism, that it's become a real buzzword. Some people almost just roll their eyes and think that it's meaningless because it's tossed around so often. The definition I came to in all of these interviews, going to about 24 different newsrooms, was to come up with what engaged journalism is. And actually, Megan helped me refine this a little bit in the very latter stages of before the book went to press. But the definition I came up with in collaboration with everyone I talked to was the degree to which a news organization actually actively considers and interacts with its audience in furtherance of its journalistic and financial mission. So the book really is kind of in both a journalistic and a business-based argument for why engagement is important. And it does use the term audience unapologetically. There's a whole footnote in the book about the distinction, between the one-way audience that received messages and the two-way conversation that we're all having now. But first Dan Gilmore, when he talked about the former audience, and then Jay Rosen took it a step further with the people formerly known as the audience. And that's a mouthful when you're talking about this stuff to say every single time you're talking about the audience. So we get it. It's a two-way conversation or many-to-many conversation now, but audience is just a cleaner term to use. So just wanted to convey that. So and before I talk about the 5 main ways that I found that news organizations are trying to engage their audiences, I just want to say that this book really builds upon the work of a lot of people in our profession, and specifically a lot of people in this room. I turned a lot to the work of Joy Mayer, the Minister of Engagement, who began some really important work in this area here. As an RJI fellow, she blogged about her findings. She did a pointer webinar that was extremely useful to me in the early stages of this book. And, but there's, I mean, just looking around, I mean, Matt Dorenzo, I interviewed Matt for the book, you know, Megan's there, Justin, the man of the day, you know, you're cited numerous times in the book. So it really kind of builds on the work of a lot of people in this room. But, and the other thing that I'll say is there's a lot of practitioners here that are doing this every day who know more about it than I do. And Jody Gersh read the book from Gannett and posted a very nice comment on Facebook pointing out that it was really affirming to her reading the book because while there's very little mention of Gannett in the book, there could be a whole other book written about Gannett's audience engagement initiatives and very similar initiatives to the newsrooms that I visited. I tried to be opportunistic. You know, I would go to a conference and I would try to, you know, go to as many newsrooms, you know, tack on an extra day or two that I could when I went there. But the newsrooms that I selected to visit do not represent the sum total of what's going on in engagement in journalism today. And you know, I think there could be a whole other book just about what Gannett is doing in this field. Anyway, but before I mean, I don't want to talk for too long, and I really, it would be hypocritical of me to stand up here and give a one-way lecture for 20 minutes, right? If I'm arguing that you need to engage your audience. So, but what I'm just going to very briefly talk about the 5 central areas that I found that news organizations were trying to earn the attention of their audiences. And I can go deeper into any of these 5, and I'm happy to do so. But I first just want to tackle the idea that when you write a book, an ink-on-paper book about a subject that's so fast evolving as digital journalism and audience engagement, it's a real challenge because I'll tell you, a lot of the people who I interviewed for this book have changed jobs, they've been promoted. Some of the initiatives described in this book have evolved, you know, and they aren't exactly going on, being executed now in the same way they were described in this book. You know, digital first media is, you know, now acquired, you know, and so, but what I knew that going into the book, and so I decided, you know what, I want to try to at least try to come up with some kind of a framework, some kind of a structure that can provide a look at, you know, the main areas in which news organizations are trying to engage their audiences, and hope that those 5 main categories are going to continue at least a few years into the future before we start all getting our news through holograms or chips in our brains or whatever. And so what I also hope is that these 5 areas, which are conveniently the 5 chapters in the book, can sort of prompt a newsroom or prompt an individual journalist to do a little self-audit and take a look and say, how am I doing as a journalist in engaging my audience in these 5 areas? Or how is my newsroom doing in these 5 areas? You know, oh, they're doing pretty good with face-to-face engagement, but they could do a lot better with super-serving niche audiences, for example. So, so anyway, that's the intention of the book. And it is underscored by another word I've heard a lot today is the idea of a mindset. You know, that the specific tactics are going to evolve, but it's really just a mindset of actually integrating this into the work that everybody in the operation does every single day, and that can be tricky. But 5 main ways. So I did visit the Register Citizen, the famed open newsroom, the Newsroom Cafe in Torrington, Connecticut, that Matt helped start. And so that was before I launch into the 5 main areas. I mean, what was really revealing to me is that, you know, I'd read so much about the Newsroom Cafe. The New York Times wrote about it, you know, and it was there was all this, you know, I think the New York Times called it Lou Grant meets Starbucks, you know, where it was the public was welcome to come in and actually participate in news meetings. As it evolved, I think I visited maybe about 1.5 years or 2 years after this opened. Sure, the news meetings were still open to classes or to anyone who wanted to come, but there was an initial spurt in people who came to participate in these news meetings, but over time, the Register Citizen became more like a public institution almost. It's the only place in town other than the library where you could get free Wi-Fi. You could come in and buy a cup of coffee with a coin-operated Keurig machine, which I had never seen before. But like tutors would come in and do lessons with pupils. There were classes, Bible study groups and Tai Chi groups that could meet in this former converted factory space. And it was really eye-opening to me that a lot of the connection to the community wasn't directly through crowdsourcing or directly participating in news meetings. It was just becoming a trusted part of the community. So that was really interesting to me. But here are the 5 main areas that I found news organizations were practicing engagement. The first was actually even more surprising than I realized. Not digital at all. It was the idea of engaging audiences face-to-face through events like the Texas Tribune Festival that Tim described, through events like the GeekWire Summer Bash up in Seattle. GeekWire's about a 4-year-old tech news startup in Seattle that gets huge revenues. They're a for-profit. They get a large portion of their revenues come from sponsored events. And this is their summer bash, where there were hundreds of people there who paid $50 or $60 a ticket to come and compete for the golden paddle, which was the prize that you got if you won the ping pong tournament. And there were sponsors there. People went because it was a networking opportunity. And this is when it comes to face-to-face engagement, one thing that I try to reframe the idea of civic journalism is not just an obligation, not just assembling a town hall of city council candidates out of the goodness of your heart to do the public a service. That's part of it, but creating events that are actually in people's self-interest to want to attend because they're fun, because they're a networking draw, because they need to, they want to be there. It's not just a civic duty. That's one area that can provide revenue that can in turn help subsidize the public interest journalism that has never paid for itself anyway. The second is probably the more traditional. When most people think of engagement, they think of social media and using the digital tools of the day to best connect with their audiences. So it talks about comments and some. I visited the Christian Science Monitor during a time when they decided to shut down comments. I also visited the Kalamazoo Gazette, an advanced publications paper that requires its reporters to go in and interact and measures the way that it interacts in the comments. So just the different philosophies behind that and the strategies. Obviously social media, crowdsourcing. New Haven Register, when I was there, was doing an open newsroom, a Cover It Live or Scribble Live chat with its news meeting that the public could participate in. Again, we can dig deeper into any of these in the questions or as the conference unfolds. The third main way I found was that news organizations were, as Tim said, super serving smaller audiences, serving the passionate vertical. And those niche audiences can be defined by geography, with things like hyperlocal blogs, like the West Seattle blog, very famously successful hyperlocal blog, or by topic. And I have here the Dallas Morning News high school football app, which was the first to have play-by-play coverage of up to 60 high school football games, taking the ESPN approach to the high school level. And there were actually some tricky components to that. Another big part in this chapter is Politico Pro, although you don't see it on the screen, but just the idea of super serving that diehard Capitol staffer audience that just thrives on that granular information. What bill just cleared committee, that sort of thing. The fourth main area that I found was the idea of search, explore, and play, delivering interactive news experiences. Obviously, data-driven journalism is a big part of this, and the Texas Tribune, ProPublica, and others have really excelled at this. The other is the idea of gamifying the news. Another thing that really emerged as I was writing this book in 2012 and 2013 was the rise of BuzzFeed, right? And the listicles that a lot of people dismissed as sort of silly news quizzes and listicles, but actually a lot of respectable legacy media outlets are taking a page from that now, because if you can somehow engage your audience and make the news fun for them, you can make it more approachable and maybe spend more engaged time, like Chartbeat said, and dig deeper. So gamifying the news is another part of the idea of searching, exploring, and playing. And then the last chapter just takes a look at measuring and monetizing the audience relationship. This was the Texas Tribune's Gecko board, analytics board. Tim, I was there a couple weeks ago. I don't think it's up anymore. But just measuring, just we have all these tools at our disposal. Why not understand your audience, where it's coming from, what the trends are, but then don't sacrifice editorial judgment, solely to the numbers. It's always that mix. And so the last chapter really explores that angle. So I'm going to wrap this up by boiling it all down to a tweet, and that is that engagement is crucial to journalism's survival, but to be effective, it must fill a specific audience need, and it comes with perks and costs. One of the things I like to say about the book is that it is overall an optimistic look at the future of media and audience engagement, but it's not all rainbows and unicorns. There's some frank discussion about burnout, and also discussions with some editors who felt like they don't have as much time to mentor young reporters anymore because the metabolism of being a reporter has accelerated so fast, and there's so much to do these days with comparatively fewer resources. But overall, I will say I expected to encounter a lot more pessimism than I did visiting these newsrooms. I met people of all ages, backgrounds, that you could possibly think of, who once they adopted this mindset of integrating the audience and really thinking about their audience and integrating it into their jobs, it really infused their work with a much greater sense of purpose and was revitalizing to their careers. So it comes with, like anything, with benefits and drawbacks, but overall, the ship has sailed. That's the direction we're heading, and so we might as well embrace it. With that, I'd love to hear your questions.
Okay, so we have time for a couple of questions. While I bring the microphone around to whoever wants to ask questions. Jake, you said it was a couple of years ago you completed the research. 5 is a good round number. If there were going to be a 6 in the meantime of when you finished the research and now, what might you add as the 6th thing that you're seeing people do to engage their audiences?
Well, what I would do is do an entire chapter on mobile in particular, and how that's changing engagement. The book really only scratches the surface of it, and that was kind of by design because I knew it was evolving so rapidly that any statistic that I quoted was going to be outdated by the time it came out. But it seems there really is a mobile component. I actually liked what one thing said earlier today about that it should really be an audience-first mindset and not a mobile-first or a laptop-first or whatever. But I do think drilling down specifically on mobile engagement, wearables, the Apple Watch, that's the area that I could really sink my teeth into.
Okay. Other questions for Jake from around the room? Anyone? I could keep going. Okay, down here in front.
Yeah, I'm from St. Louis. Do you think there's a special skill set that journalists need for this face-to-face interaction? We have a lot of reporters who were great at what they used to do, but this is not what they learned in J school.
Absolutely true, and there's some folks I talked to in the book who aren't really comfortable in that kind of an extroverted kind of ambassador role, and that's something to keep in mind. I would say, first of all, those people need to understand, okay, that's not, you went into journalism to save the world and not to be an MC at an event and to, give a fulsome introduction to the person who's going to be the target of your next beat investigation or something. It's a little cozier type of relationship, and some reporters are understandably not initially comfortable with that. But I think if you approach those events, and approach them as journalism, do not cede control over the questioning or the programming, and really kind of think of it as an opportunity. I mean, it's been huge for the Tribune in terms of revenue and in terms of expanding its importance in the whole Austin Capitol insider scene. So I would make the argument to people who are hesitant that this advances the mission of your organization and your career personally. So if you're maybe a little hesitant, you might want to rethink that. The second part, though, I think is management probably should they should take into account people's personality types and who's more natural in that type of setting and who might not be as natural, and make those decisions in deciding who you put out there.
Okay. Jake, thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Okay. Thanks.